The clock on the grocery store wall showed 9:15 p.m. when 17-year-old Damon Williams finally finished stacking the last row of cereal boxes. His back ached from lifting heavy inventory all evening, but he couldn't complain. This job at Murphy's Corner Market was helping his mom pay the bills, and every dollar counted in their small household. "Good work tonight, Damon," called out Mr. Murphy from behind the counter. The elderly store owner had given Damon a chance when other places wouldn't. Hire someone without experience. "See you tomorrow after school." Damon grabbed his worn backpack and pushed through the glass doors into the cool October night. Rain had been threatening all day, and now fat droplets were starting to fall, creating tiny circles on the cracked sidewalk. He pulled his hood up and started the familiar 20-minute walk home through the quiet streets of East Cleveland. As he walked, Damon's mind wandered to his homework waiting at home. He had a chemistry test tomorrow that he couldn't afford to fail. Maintaining his B+ average was crucial for the college scholarships he desperately needed. His guidance counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been encouraging him to apply for pre-med programs. Ever since he was 12 and watched paramedics save his neighbor's life during a heart attack, Damon had dreamed of becoming a doctor. The rain picked up as he reached the intersection where Maple Street met Highland Avenue. This was the boundary between his neighborhood and the wealthy Shaker Heights area. On one side stood modest apartments and small houses with chain-link fences. On the other side, large homes sat behind perfectly manicured lawns and iron gates. Damon often wondered what it would be like to live in one of those big houses, not because he was jealous, but because he was curious. His mother had always taught him that money didn't make someone better than anyone else, but it sure could make life easier. With wealth came opportunities, good schools, and the chance to pursue dreams without worrying about where the next meal would come from. The traffic light ahead turned yellow, then red. Damon stopped at the crosswalk, watching the occasional car pass by. Most were expensive sedans and SUVs heading home to those big houses. He noticed how different this part of town felt, even late at night. The streetlights were brighter, the roads were smoother, and everything just seemed cleaner. A silver Mercedes sedan approached the intersection, moving faster than it should have been in the rain. Damon watched as the car hit a puddle and seemed to lose control for a moment. The driver corrected quickly, but Damon could tell they were going too fast for the wet conditions. The light turned green, and Damon started crossing. He was halfway across when he heard the screech of tires behind him. The sound made his blood run cold. He spun around to see the same silver Mercedes skidding sideways down Highland Avenue. The driver was fighting to control the wheel, but the wet road had other plans. Time seemed to slow down as Damon watched the car slide toward the concrete barrier that separated the road from a small park. The Mercedes hit the barrier with a sickening crunch of metal and glass. Steam immediately began rising from under the hood, and one of the headlights flickered before going dark. For a moment, everything was quiet, except for the sound of rain hitting the pavement. Then Damon heard something that made his heart race, the hiss of escaping gas and the ominous tick-tick-tick of hot metal cooling. Most people would have pulled out their phone to record a video. Others might have called 911 and waited for help to arrive. But Damon wasn't most people. His first aid training from health class kicked in, along with something deeper, a need to help that had been ingrained in him since childhood. He dropped his backpack and ran toward the wreckage. As he got closer, he could see that the front of the car was badly damaged. The hood was crumpled, and there was a spider web of cracks across the windshield. Through the broken glass, he could make out a figure slumped over the steering wheel. "Hey," Damon called out as he reached the driver's side door. "Are you okay in there?" No response. The person inside wasn't moving. Damon tried the door handle, but it was jammed. The impact had warped the frame, making it impossible to open normally. He could smell gasoline now, stronger than before, and he noticed a small puddle forming under the car. This wasn't good. He ran around to the passenger side, hoping that door would open. It was stuck too, but not as badly. Using all his strength, Damon managed to pry it open enough to squeeze inside the car. The scene inside made his stomach turn. An elderly white man, probably in his 70s, was unconscious and bleeding from a cut on his forehead. His breathing was shallow, and his skin looked pale even in the dim light from the dashboard. Damon had never been in a situation like this before, but he remembered what Mrs. Rodriguez had taught them in health class. Check for breathing. Check for a pulse. Don't move someone unless they're in immediate danger. He leaned over and put his ear near the man's mouth. He could feel weak breaths against his cheek. Good. He was still breathing. Next, Damon carefully placed 2 fingers on the man's wrist, searching for a pulse. It took him a moment to find it, and when he did, his heart sank. The pulse was there, but it was weak and irregular. The smell of gasoline was getting stronger, and Damon noticed that the engine was making strange clicking sounds. He didn't know much about cars, but he knew enough to realize this was dangerous. If there was a fire, they would both be trapped. He had to make a decision. Moving an injured person could make their injuries worse, but staying in a car that might catch fire could kill them both. Damon took a deep breath and made his choice. He was going to get this man out of here no matter what. Damon's hands trembled as he assessed the situation. The unconscious man was trapped by his seatbelt, which had locked tight during the impact. Damon felt around for the release button, his fingers slipping on the wet plastic. The rain was coming through the broken windshield now, mixing with the blood on the man's forehead. Come on, Damon whispered to himself, finally managing to click the seatbelt free. The man's body slumped forward, and Damon had to catch him to prevent him from falling onto the steering wheel. The smell of gasoline was overwhelming now. Damon could hear liquid dripping somewhere under the car, and the engine was making sounds he'd never heard before. Grinding, clicking, hissing. Every instinct told him they needed to get out of this car immediately. Carefully, Damon worked his arms under the man's shoulders. The stranger was heavier than he looked, probably around 180 pounds of dead weight. Damon was strong from his job, lifting boxes, but this was different. He had to be gentle while also moving quickly. "Sir, can you hear me?" Damon spoke directly into the man's ear as he slowly pulled him toward the passenger door. "I'm going to get you out of here. Just hang on." The man's eyes fluttered open for a moment, unfocused and confused. His lips moved, but no sound came. Out. Then his eyes closed again and his head fell back against Damon's shoulder. Getting through the partially open passenger door was like solving a puzzle. Damon had to twist and maneuver, supporting the man's weight while squeezing through the narrow opening. His jacket caught on a piece of bent metal, tearing a long gash in the fabric. He didn't care. Once they were both outside the car, Damon carefully lowered the man to the wet pavement, positioning him far enough away from the vehicle to be safe. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking through his clothes and making everything slippery. The man's breathing was still shallow, and the cut on his forehead was bleeding more freely now. Damon pulled off his work shirt, leaving him in just a t-shirt, and pressed it against the wound. The white fabric quickly turned red, but the pressure seemed to slow the bleeding. With his free hand, Damon fumbled for his phone. His fingers were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to dial 911. 911, what's your emergency? "There's been a car accident at Highland and Maple," Damon said, trying to keep his voice steady. "A man is hurt bad, and I think his car might catch fire. We need an ambulance and fire department right away." "Is the victim conscious?" Damon looked down at the man's face. His eyes were closed, but his chest was still rising and falling. He was awake for a second, but now he's unconscious again. He's breathing, but it's not good. There's blood coming from his head. "Are you trained in first aid?" "A little bit. I'm keeping pressure on the wound." "Good. Stay on the line with me. Help is on the way." As Damon waited, he noticed more details about the man he'd saved. His clothes were expensive, a cashmere coat that probably cost more than Damon's family made in 2 months. His shoes were leather, polished and barely worn. On his wrist was a watch that caught the light from the street lamp, gold and clearly valuable. But none of that mattered right now. Rich or poor, this was someone's father, maybe someone's grandfather. This was a human being who needed help. "Sir, can you hear me?" Damon tried again, patting the man's cheek gently. "What's your name?" The man's eyes opened again, this time focusing on Damon's face. His mouth moved, and Damon leaned closer to hear. My chest," the man whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. Hurts. Damon's heart sank. A chest pain combined with the weakness and pale skin could mean a heart attack. He'd learned about the signs in health class. This man might have had a heart attack while driving, which would explain why he lost control of the car. Just stay calm, sir. Help is coming. Can you tell me your name? Richard, the man managed to say. Richard. Okay, Richard. I'm Damon. You were in a car accident, but you're going to be fine. The paramedics are on their way. Richard's eyes were clearer now, and he seemed to be taking in his surroundings. He looked at the wreckage of his car, then back at Damon. You pulled me out? Yes, sir. Your car was leaking gas. I had to get you away from it. Richard tried to sit up, but Damon gently held him down. Don't move yet. You hit your head pretty hard. In the distance, Damon could hear sirens. The sound had never been so welcome. Red and blue lights appeared at the far end of Highland Avenue, growing brighter as they approached. Did you call for help? Richard asked. Yes, sir. They'll be here in just a minute. Richard stared at Damon with an expression he couldn't quite read. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper, like surprise or amazement. You could have just walked away, Richard said softly. The comment caught Damon off guard. Why would I do that? Most people would have. Most people would have taken out their phone to film it. Damon shook his head. That's not... I couldn't just leave you there. The fire truck arrived first, followed closely by an ambulance and 2 police cars. Suddenly, the quiet intersection was filled with flashing lights and people in uniforms. Paramedics rushed over with equipment while firefighters sprayed foam on the leaking gasoline. Step back, son, one of the paramedics said to Damon. We'll take it from here. Damon moved away but didn't leave. He watched as the medical team took Richard's vital signs, started an IV, and loaded him onto a stretcher. Before they put him in the ambulance, Richard called out. Wait, where's the young man who helped me? Damon stepped forward. I'm right here, sir. What's your name again? Damon Williams. Damon Williams, Richard repeated, as if committing it to memory. Thank you, son. You saved my life. The paramedics wheeled Richard toward the ambulance, but he kept looking back at Damon until the doors closed. As the ambulance drove away, its sirens fading into the night, Damon finally realized what he'd done. He'd saved someone's life. The emergency room at Cleveland General Hospital buzzed with late-night activity. Richard Whitman lay in bed 3, electrodes attached to his chest, monitoring his heart rhythm. The cut on his forehead had required 12 stitches, but that was the least of his concerns. The doctors had confirmed what he'd suspected during those terrifying moments in the car. He'd suffered a mild heart attack. You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Whitman, Dr. Patricia Lee said as she reviewed his chart. The heart attack caused you to lose consciousness while driving. If someone hadn't pulled you from that vehicle when they did... Richard nodded, remembering the smell of gasoline and the young man's calm voice reassuring him that help was coming. The person who helped? Piercy, do you know anything about him? I'm afraid not. The paramedics said a teenager called 911 and had already moved you to safety when they arrived. He probably saved your life. As Dr. Lee left to check on other patients, Richard found himself thinking about those crucial moments after the accident. The rain, the pain in his chest, and then a voice cutting through the confusion. A young black teenager who could have walked away but chose to risk his own safety instead. Richard had lived 72 years and built a real estate empire worth over $50 million. He'd met presidents, celebrities, and captains of a industry. But he couldn't remember the last time someone had shown him genuine kindness without wanting something in return. The next morning, Richard's assistant, Helen Morrison, arrived with his phone, laptop, and a stack of get-well cards. Helen had worked for him for 15 years and knew how to handle his business affairs when he couldn't. The news crews are calling, Helen said, settling into the chair beside his bed. Someone filmed the rescue on their phone. It's already been viewed over 1 million times online. Richard reached for his phone and watched the grainy video. The footage was taken from across the street, but it clearly showed a young man pulling him from the wreckage and then staying with him until help arrived. The comments below the video ranged from praise for the teenager's heroism to debates about whether he had any obligation to help. "Have you found out who he is?" Richard asked. "His name is Damon Williams, 17 years old, junior at Lincoln High School. He works part-time at Murphy's Corner Market on Maple Street. That's all I could find so far." Richard studied the video again, watching how carefully Damon had moved him away from the car, how he'd used his own shirt to stop the bleeding. "I want to thank him properly, and his family. Of course, I can arrange something." But before Helen could make any calls, Richard's cardiologist, Dr. James Patterson, entered with a serious expression. "Mr. Whitman, we need to discuss your treatment plan. The heart attack was mild, but it's a warning sign. You'll need to make some significant lifestyle changes." For the next hour, Dr. Patterson explained the medication regimen, dietary restrictions, and exercise program that would be necessary for Richard's recovery. As a successful businessman who was used to being in control, the idea of slowing down was difficult to accept. "How long before I can return to work?" Richard asked. "At least 2 weeks of rest, then we'll reevaluate. No stress, no long hours, no business travel for at least a month." After the doctor left, Richard sat in silence, processing everything. At 72, he'd built his wealth by working 16-hour days and never backing down from a challenge. The idea of being dependent on others, even temporarily, was unsettling. That afternoon, Helen returned with news that made his day brighter. "I've made contact with the Williams family," she said. "Damon's mother, Angela, agreed to let you visit once you're released from the hospital. They live in the Fairview Apartments on East 85th Street. What did you tell her?" "Just that you wanted to thank her son for saving your life. She seemed surprised that you wanted to visit personally." Richard wasn't surprised by her reaction. In his world, important people sent representatives or made charitable donations instead of showing up at people's doors. But this felt different. This was personal. The story of the rescue continued to grow online. Local news stations picked it up, and by Tuesday evening, Damon's heroic actions were the lead story on 3 different channels. Richard watched from his hospital bed as reporters interviewed neighbors and classmates who all described Damon as helpful, responsible, and kind. "He's the type of kid who would shovel your driveway without being asked," said Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door to the Williams family. "His mother raised him right." The interviews revealed more about Damon's life. He maintained a B+ average while working part-time to help support his family. His dream was to become a doctor, specifically an emergency room physician. He volunteered at a local community center on weekends, helping younger kids with their homework. Richard found himself fascinated by this young man who had shown such courage and compassion. In his business dealings, Richard had learned to be skeptical of people's motives. Everyone wanted something, a job, an investment, a favor. But watching Damon in that video, seeing how he'd acted without hesitation, Richard realized he was looking at something rare, genuine heroism. Wednesday morning brought unexpected news. Helen arrived at the hospital with a concerned expression. "There's been a development," she said carefully. "I got a call from a Detective Morrison with the Cleveland police. Someone reported suspicious activity related to your accident." Richard sat up straighter in his bed. "What kind of suspicious activity?" "Apparently, someone called in a tip, claiming they saw a young black male tampering with your vehicle after the accident. They're treating it as a possible robbery investigation." Richard felt a surge of anger that made his heart monitor beep faster. "That's ridiculous. Damon saved my life. He didn't rob me." "I know that, and you know that. But the police have to investigate any report they receive. Detective Morrison said they'd like to speak with you about what you remember from the accident." "Then get him on the phone right now. I'm not going to let them harass that boy over some anonymous tip from someone who obviously didn't see what really happened." But even as Helen dialed the detective's number, Richard felt a sick feeling in his stomach. He'd lived long enough to know how these situations could unfold, especially when they involved a young black man and an expensive car in a wealthy neighborhood. This was about to become much more complicated than a simple rescue story. Thursday. Morning started like any other day for Damon Williams. He woke up at 6:30 a.m., showered quickly to leave hot water for his mother and younger sister, and grabbed a piece of toast before heading to school. The media attention from the rescue had died down after a few days, and he was grateful to return to his normal routine. During lunch period, his friend Carlos brought up the rescue again. "Man, you're famous," Carlos said, showing Damon his phone screen. "The video has like 3 million views now." "I wish people would stop sharing it," Damon replied, picking at his cafeteria pizza. "I just did what anyone would do." "Not everyone would do that, bro. Most people would have called 911 and waited." Damon shrugged. He genuinely didn't understand why people thought his actions were so extraordinary. Someone needed help and he helped them. It seemed simple enough. After school, Damon went to his job at Murphy's Corner Market. The elderly store owner had been proud of his employees' heroic actions and had even put up a small newspaper clipping about the rescue near the register. "How's our local hero today?" Mr. Murphy asked with a grin as Damon clocked in. "Just ready to work, Mr. Murphy." The shift passed normally. Damon stocked shelves, helped customers, and cleaned the store. By 9 p.m. he was tired and looking forward to going home, finishing his homework, and getting some sleep. As he walked through his neighborhood, Damon noticed how different it felt from the wealthy area where the accident had happened. Here, some streetlights were broken, and many of the apartment buildings needed repairs. But it was home, and he knew most of the people who lived here. They looked out for each other. Damon climbed the stairs to his family's second-floor apartment and used his key to let himself in. The smell of his mother's cooking immediately made him smile. Angela Williams worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and doing data entry during the day, but she always managed to have dinner ready when her children came home. "How was work, baby?" she called from the kitchen. "Good, Mom. Smells great. In here. Sit down. I made your favorite, chicken and rice." As they ate dinner together, Damon told his mother about his chemistry test, which he'd aced, and his plans for the weekend. His 12-year-old sister, Keisha, chattered about her friends and complained about her math homework. It was a normal, comfortable evening. Around 10:30 p.m., Damon was at the kitchen table working on his English essay when there was a loud knock at the front door. Angela looked up from the bills she was paying, concern crossing her face. Who could that be this late? She wondered aloud. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Angela walked to the door and looked through the peephole. What she saw made her heart race. "Damon," she called, her voice tight with worry. "Come here." Damon set down his pen and joined his mother at the door. Through the peephole, he could see 2 police officers standing in the hallway. One was white, middle-aged, with a stern expression. The other was younger, black, but his face was equally serious. Angela's hands shook as she unlocked the door. Growing up in their neighborhood, she'd learned to be cautious around police. Too many interactions went wrong even when people had done nothing illegal. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Rodriguez, and this is Detective Johnson," the older officer said, showing his badge. "We're looking for Damon Williams. That's my son. Is something wrong? We'd like to ask him some questions about an incident that occurred on Tuesday night. May we come in?" Angela looked back at Damon, who stepped forward. "I'm Damon Williams. Son, we understand you were present at the scene of a car accident on Highland Avenue Tuesday night." "Yes, sir. I helped pull the man out of his car." "We'd like to talk about that. Mind if we sit down?" Angela reluctantly invited the officers into their small living room. Keisha had come out of her bedroom, curious about the late-night visitors, but Angela quickly sent her back to her room. Detective Rodriguez pulled out a small notebook while Detective Johnson looked around the apartment. Damon noticed how the younger officer's eyes lingered on their old television and the second-hand furniture. "Damon, can you tell us exactly what happened Tuesday night?" Rodriguez asked. Damon recounted the story he'd told several times before, seeing the accident, pulling the man from the car, calling 911, and waiting with him until help arrived. The officers listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. "Did you take anything from the vehicle?" Detective Johnson asked suddenly. The question caught Damon off guard. "Take anything?" "No, sir. I was trying to help the man." "Some witnesses reported seeing you going through the car before emergency services arrived." "That's not true," Damon said firmly. "I went into the car to get the man out because it was leaking gas. I didn't take anything." Angela stood up abruptly. "Officers, my son is a hero. He saved that man's life. Why are you treating him like a criminal?" "Ma'am, we're just following up on a report we received. Someone called in a tip about suspicious activity." "What kind of tip?" Angela demanded. Rodriguez hesitated before answering. "An anonymous caller reported seeing a young black male tampering with the vehicle and possibly taking items before police arrived." The words hit the room like a slap. Angela felt her face grow hot with anger and humiliation. Damon sat frozen, trying to process what he was hearing. "So someone sees my son saving a man's life and they call the police to report him as a criminal?" Angela's voice was rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "We have to investigate all reports, ma'am. It's standard procedure." "Where is this coming from?" Damon asked quietly. "Did the man I helped say I stole something?" "We haven't been able to speak with Mr. Whitman yet due to his medical condition," Johnson replied. "Then this is based on one anonymous phone call from someone who apparently didn't see what really happened?" The officers exchanged glances. Rodriguez closed his notebook and stood up. "Damon, we're going to need you to come down to the station to answer some more questions. We'd also like to search your room." "Search his room for what?" Angela stepped protectively in front of her son. "Any items that might have been taken from the vehicle." "You can search whatever you want," Damon said, standing up. "I didn't take anything." For the next 30 minutes, the officers went through Damon's small bedroom, looking through his clothes, school supplies, and personal belongings. They found nothing suspicious because there was nothing to find. As they prepared to leave, Rodriguez handed Angela a card. "If anything comes to mind, give us a call. We may have more questions." After the door closed behind them, Angela and Damon sat in stunned silence. The injustice of the situation was overwhelming. A young man risks his own safety to save someone's life, and somehow he ends up being investigated as a criminal. "Mom, I swear I didn't take anything," Damon said softly. "Baby, I know you didn't. But this is how it works sometimes. No good deed goes unpunished, especially when you look like us." Damon felt something breaking inside him. He'd grown up believing that doing the right thing mattered, that helping others was its own reward. But now he was learning a harder lesson about the world, and how some people's assumptions could turn a hero into a suspect with nothing more than an anonymous phone call. Richard Whitman was pacing his hospital room despite doctor's orders to rest when Helen arrived with the morning newspapers. The headline on the Cleveland Plain Dealer made his blood pressure spike. "Teen hero under investigation in rescue incident." "This is outrageous," Richard said, reading the article that detailed the police investigation into Damon Williams. "Get Detective Rodriguez on the phone immediately." "I already tried. He's in meetings all morning." But his sergeant said they're just following standard procedure for any incident involving property worth over $50,000. Richard crumpled the newspaper in frustration. "That boy saved my life, and they're treating him like a criminal based on what? An anonymous tip?" The irony wasn't lost on him. Richard had built his fortune in real estate development, and he knew how prejudice and assumptions could shape people's perceptions. He'd seen qualified black contractors passed over for jobs, watched as neighborhood compositions changed property values in ways that had nothing to do with actual market conditions. But he'd always told himself that was just business, that he wasn't personally responsible for society's problems. Now, watching an injustice unfold against someone who had risked his own safety to help him, Richard felt a responsibility he'd never experienced before. "I'm checking myself out of here," he announced, reaching for his clothes. "Mr. Whitman, the doctor said you need at least 2 more days of monitoring. The doctors can monitor me at home. I'm not staying here while that young man is being harassed for saving my life." 3 hours later, against medical advice, Richard was sitting in the back of his Mercedes sedan being driven through East Cleveland. The neighborhood was a stark contrast to his gated community in Shaker Heights. Buildings needed repairs and many storefronts were empty. But he also noticed children playing in small parks, families sitting on porches, and community gardens that showed people caring for their environment despite limited resources. The Fairview Apartments were a modest brick complex that had seen better days. Richard's driver, James, looked uncomfortable as they pulled into the parking lot. Sir, maybe you should call first or have me go up alone. No, James. This is something I need to do myself. Richard climbed the stairs to the second floor, his chest aching slightly from the exertion. He found apartment 2B and knocked gently on the door. Angela Williams answered, clearly surprised to see a well-dressed elderly white man at her door. Mrs. Williams, I'm Richard Whitman. Your son saved my life. Angela's expression shifted from surprise to wariness. Mr. Whitman, I wasn't expecting you. May I come in? I have something important to discuss with you and Damon. Angela hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let him enter. The apartment was small but immaculately clean. Family photos covered one wall, and Richard could see school awards and certificates that clearly belonged to Damon. Damon's not here right now, Angela said. He's at school. Actually, I came to see you first. I understand the police have been questioning your son about the accident. Angela's face hardened. They searched his room last night, treated him like a criminal instead of the hero he is. That's why I'm here. This is completely unacceptable, and I'm going to put a stop to it immediately. Richard pulled out his phone and dialed the police chief's direct number. As one of the city's major developers and political donors, he had access that most people didn't. Chief Martinez? This is Richard Whitman. We need to talk about the Williams investigation. Yes, I know about the tip. The entire thing is ridiculous. I'm telling you right now that Damon Williams saved my life and did nothing wrong. No, Chief, this isn't a request. Angela listened in amazement as Richard spoke with authority and confidence that came from decades of wielding influence and power. It's handled, Richard said after ending the call. The investigation will be closed within the hour, and the detectives will formally apologize to your son. Just like that? Angela asked. Just like that. I should have done it sooner, but I was in the hospital and didn't know what was happening. They sat in silence for a moment before Angela spoke again. Mr. Whitman, can I ask you something? If my son had been white, do you think someone would have called in that tip? The question hung in the air. Richard had been asking himself the same thing since he'd learned about the investigation. No, he said finally. I don't think they would have. Neither do I. When Damon arrived home from school that afternoon, he was surprised to find the man he'd rescued sitting at his kitchen table, drinking coffee with his mother. Mr. Whitman, what are you doing here? Are you okay? I'm fine, son. Thanks to you. But I'm here because you're not okay. The police investigation has been dropped, and I've made sure this kind of harassment won't happen again. Damon sat down, trying to process this development. They dropped it? Completely. You'll receive a formal apology tomorrow. I don't understand. Yesterday they acted like I was a criminal. Richard leaned forward, his expression serious. Damon, what happened to you was wrong. It was based on prejudice and assumptions that have nothing to do with who you are or what you did. I'm sorry it took me this long to intervene. You don't have to apologize for other people's actions. Actually, I do. See, I've lived in this city for over 40 years. I've built buildings, developed neighborhoods, and served on boards that make decisions affecting people's lives. I've always told myself that I was just doing business, that I wasn't responsible for society's problems. But when I see injustice happening to someone who risked his own safety to help me, I realize I do have a responsibility. Richard reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Damon, your mother tells me you want to become a doctor. Specifically, an emergency room physician. Yes, sir, that's the plan. Good, because I've established a scholarship fund in your name. $25,000 for your college education. But that's just the beginning. He handed Damon a letter from Cleveland General Hospital. I've also arranged for you to participate in an accelerated EMT training program this summer. If you complete it successfully, you'll be certified as an emergency medical technician before your senior year of high school. The hospital has also offered you a part-time position in their emergency department once you turn 18. Damon stared at the letter, unable to believe what he was reading. Mr. Whitman, this is too much. I didn't help you expecting anything in return. I know you didn't. That's exactly why you deserve it. Angela wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her son's dreams suddenly become achievable. For years, she'd worked multiple jobs to provide for her children, always worrying about how she'd afford college for Damon. "There's one more thing," Richard continued. "I want you to know that what happened with the police investigation has opened my eyes to problems I've been ignoring for too long. I'm starting a foundation focused on criminal justice reform and educational opportunities for young people in underserved communities. I'd like you to serve on the advisory board if you're interested." Damon looked at his mother, then back at Richard. "You're serious about all this?" "Dead serious. You saved my life, Damon. But more than that, you showed me what real character looks like. In a world where people often look the other way, you ran toward danger to help a stranger. That's the kind of person who can make a real difference in this world." 6 months later, the story had taken on a life of its own. Damon's rescue of Richard Whitman had been featured in national news stories about everyday heroes. But more importantly, it had sparked meaningful conversations about racial bias, assumptions, and the importance of not letting prejudice overshadow acts of genuine heroism. Damon was thriving in his EMT training, earning top marks and already showing the calm competence that would make him an excellent emergency room physician. The scholarship had lifted a tremendous burden from his family, and the part-time job at the hospital was giving him invaluable experience. Richard had indeed started his foundation, and it was already funding programs in 3 cities. The incident had changed him in ways he was still discovering, making him more aware of his privilege and more committed to using it responsibly. But perhaps the most significant change was the friendship that had developed between the two men. Despite their different backgrounds and ages, they'd found common ground in their shared belief that people should help each other, regardless of race, class, or circumstance. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives come disguised as ordinary events. A teenager walking home from work sees an accident and makes a choice. That choice doesn't just save a life, it changes 2 lives forever and eventually touches many more. In a world that often seems divided by fear and misunderstanding, Damon, Williams, and Richard Whitman proved that courage, compassion, and human decency could bridge any gap. Their story became a reminder that heroes come in all colors, and that sometimes the most powerful force for change is simply one person choosing to do the right thing.